Welcome back for another installment of Fellowship of the Rink. With me, as always, Joe Smith of The Athletic, bringing you all the insider info on your Minnesota Wild, Golden Gophers, and apparently Tampa Bay Lightning and whoever else they call you out for, Joe. I know Russo's been on a little bit bigger bender than you, but they're pulling out all the stops.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think especially with the playoffs starting and the Wild not in it, we'll still continue our Wild coverage, but got a chance to go down to Tampa last week for a few days, which was nice. A place called home for me for 15 years, and all exit interviews with the Lightning. A lot of stories coming out of that on The Athletic, including the Steven Stamkos sweepstakes, which we'll get to eventually, and sit down with John Cooper and a few other things of how they can keep their cup window open, which is a problem a lot of teams would love to have, trying to keep their cup window open. But yeah, it's been fun to kind of dabble in the NHL circuit. And I also did a little fun trip over the weekend. I'm sure you've heard me tell the story about my dart toss road trip every year where we throw the dart at the map and that's where we go. And this year was Athens, Tennessee. So somewhat near the Smoky Mountains, not quite there, but get some time on a boat, and this is our 6th year doing it, and brought us to Winnebago, to Lake Powell, Utah, to Santa Fe, Tuskegee, Alabama, all over the place. So that's another chapter that will continue to live on. Next year, be into Big Timber, Montana. So that'll be the next year's one.
So I need to know a little bit more about this. Like, you've explained it to me before, but I need to know, like, is there any form of veto process among the group, and who actually throws the dart?
Yeah, well, so we have some, we have some bylaws that are in it. Like we can't hit a place that we currently live in or a state that we currently live in. And then once we hit a certain region, it can't be the same one back to back. Like it can't be like Santa Fe or can't be Utah and Arizona right back to back or whatever. And so initially we had thought of places that we already have lived before or areas, but we've lived all over the place between the 5 of us. So it's hard to take away 1/5 of the United States.
Yeah.
So the current bylaws are, it can't be a place or state where we currently live. So we hit Duluth at first, the first throw this year. But that was nixed because A, we've already been to Winnebago on our current list of cities that we've been to, and B, I live here. So that would have been a really cool trip, and I think we'll have to open that up soon as we get to more cities. But that's one of the only bylaws, and it has to have a place of lodging and a 1 bar. It can't be a dry county. So it's a very, we also, we're all blindfolded when we throw the dart, right? And the map's kind of back, and not just even if I was not the best dart player in the world, even if I aimed at Alaska, I wouldn't hit it, right? Or aimed at Hawaii, I wouldn't be able to hit it. But we make it so it's not just, take your pick. It's kind of the randomness is kind of part of the fun, since we've all traveled and been to almost all the states. So that gives us the places that we never would think to go to before.
And is this the same map that you guys are throwing the dart at over and over? Like, is it just mangled?
It's a pretty big map. There's a lot of holes in it, of course, for ones that didn't live up to the bylaws. And we kind of circle it, and we have people who we run into along the way kind of sign it. It's kind of like guests, that we've influential guests on our journeys. And then so it's the same map we bring each time. Typically have to pick up a dart at a Walmart somewhere on their way or whatever. But so different darts, but the same map, and we hope to keep it going for as long as we can.
Awesome tradition. Jealous. All right. Well, today we've got some more broad national coverage for the playoffs, a little bit of Minnesota Wild at the Worlds, and PWHL kickoff. We have as well Bruce Boudreau. Awesome interview, a little bit more lengthy one, so we'll be brief here with some of our stuff. Followed, of course, as always, by Keyboard Warriors from our good friends at Barrel Theory. But Joe, let's kick in with again, you mentioned already out at Tampa. What all is cooking between you and Mike, and what plans are there for playoff coverage?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mike Russo is in Florida right now. He's covering the Panthers Bruins series right now. We have a couple of our columnists at the the Rangers and Carolina, and we'll have people in all the series now. I did like 3 Tampa stories last week. I did a couple more coming this week, including a big picture look that I'll post, I think, the day this podcast comes out tomorrow. And so we'll have that. I won't be as much traveling because the baby is due in a few weeks, so I might not be won't be going to other series, but I'll be doing some more wild off-season stories and analysis and what might come next, including my deep dive on Iowa when I went down there for a few days. And depending on what the lottery turns out, where they pick some more guys where it might be in those positions to where they'll be picking at the draft. So we'll have a lot NHL wise. We'll still have some things for the Wild coming up here, leading up to, of course, draft and free agency.
There we go. Well, then let's talk Minnesota Wild specifically. We got a couple of guys that were sent over for the Worlds. I know most recently named Matt Boldy, which for whatever reason, fans like to get upset that Guerin's running Team USA, that Hynes is coaching it, and Matt Boldy is now playing on it. It's all just nepotism, apparently. I don't know.
Well, and I think Guerin made it pretty clear that the spot for Matt Boldy on the Four Nations and Olympic team isn't guaranteed. He's got to earn it. And there are a lot of really good wingers on that Team USA. And so I think this is a very important tournament for Matt, coming off a pretty solid season in Minnesota, to have that experience. And Guerin, who has played in the Olympics, who's played in World Cup and World Championships, can attest to, some of these guys have won at different levels, right? You've won at World Junior or whatever like that. But anytime you have a chance to win a championship, for your country, it only helps you know what it takes to get there. That'll help you in the NHL playoffs if they ever get to that point next year again. So I think having that experience this summer will be a big boost for not only Matt Boldy, which will have a chance to play for Coach John Hynes and work with him, which he took off once John Hynes took over in November. And I think for Filip Gustavsson, who had that kind of down year this year, he had a shutout in his first game for Sweden. Maybe having him playing some more games and some high-level games this offseason will be really important for him as he tries to kind of reset and, as he said, redeem himself for next year, assuming he's in a Wild uniform. So only one who isn't really going, I think, is Brock Faber, who was nursing some broken ribs from the playthrough for a bit in this season. But it looks like I think Ek and Brodin will be there in Sweden, or are there. Matt Boldy, of course. Marco Rossi, Matt Zuccarello, played for Norway, trying to compete to earn a spot in the Olympics as a team. So a lot of Wild players will be in action. Liam Ohgren as well on Sweden. So they'll have a lot of Wild field there in Prague. And, of course, Bill Guerin will be there, too, with John Hynes.
Of course. And it's just going to be great now to watch the mental conflict of fans on Twitter who can't decide, does the Gustavsson shutout mean we need to keep him, or does it mean that we think we can get more in a trade? And the battle will wage on.
Hey, well, I already saw, somebody responded to the big thing on Twitter, oh, good for his trade value and whatever. And I think I wrote a week or two ago, there's a lot of ways this can happen in the goalie situation. They could easily very well keep him, but have the two goalies and him and Fleury, and then bring up Wallstedt and play more games next year. That's a whole scenario. If you trade Gustavsson, unless you get a goalie back, you're putting yourself in position to have a rookie with 3 NHL games experience with a 40-year-old goalie at the last year of his career. So if goaltending kind of sunk you last year, you have to be put yourself in a better position this year. So either way, if he uses his trade value, from a fan perspective, that's great. But if he gets himself righted and starts looking more like the guy who was the end of last season as a Vezina Trophy finalist caliber goalie, then either thing are good aspects if you're a Minnesota Wild follower.
But do you feel like that's still a door that is widely open, right? Yes, part of moving on from Gustavsson, the idea of trading him this summer is that it wasn't his best year. He didn't follow up the performance the season before. But is that a bigger influence on this trade, or is it that Guerin wants Wallstedt up with the big club? Well,
I think there's a certain element of the team that would like to have that the experience of him with Flower over the course of a season. I think that's really beneficial to him. But they've said, at least publicly, a number of times that they don't want to force Wallstedt in there. I mean,
well, you have to say that publicly, though, if you're trying to get Gustavsson, right?
yeah. Like, they're not going to say, quote unquote, he's ready, but I don't think it's a scenario where Wallstedt just automatically put himself and said, hey, I'm ready. Like, I think there's reason to believe and be confident that you can throw him in there and he can split the season with Fleury. But it wasn't like it was a knockdown, drag out. Like, I am bona fide ready, and I'm here to stay. I think there's a lot of reason to feel good about it. So I think even from an honest perspective, if you're part of the Wild brass, that's another element of, whether do you keep Gustavsson or not, which is why I think they'll listen on Gustavsson, and toward the draft, they'll get maybe more interest, but I don't think it's sold that he's going to completely be gone. Then they had some issues with him too this season in terms of conditioning and some practice habits, which I talked to him about, and had really good exit meetings with him, and he understood it, and he realized it, and I think it's kind of in his hands on how he handles it this summer. I think being part of the World Championships is a good start.
Fair enough. And let's talk then about the only hockey team in Minnesota that's still playing. We got our PWHL Team Minnesota, hopefully soon to be renamed the Purple Rain. We can only hope. Unless you're a Timberwolves fan, this is really all you have to be excited about, given that you can't watch the Twins in current state. But we have the new rules instituted. Toronto has selected to play Team Minnesota.
I thought that was, I know Taylor Hynes was on our pod earlier in the year and said it was a great thing for the sport and create trash talk and everything like that. And I thought it was really cool. I don't know if you saw how they picked Minnesota, and they showed the video of like two Toronto players, and we got our chief scout to do this pick, and they had maybe like a kid, like a toddler, on a staircase, throwing the ball into one of the two nets, and it was end up in Minnesota, which is a really cool way to do it. Like maybe they forced the hand of the kid and like maybe shoved it this way, or you don't know what kind of was behind the scenes, but it definitely was a way to deflate any thought of this being like we're picking the easiest team in the league or whatever like that to be. But I would love that element in the AHL. It's never going to happen.
It won't, but I'd love it.
But can you imagine like Boston, or Florida would have picked, like, let's say they pick Brady Tkachuk, or Matthew Tkachuk goes on TV. It's like, we want Toronto, like picking the team you want to play. So
yep. Or Boston picking Toronto. Oh man, any of it. But I think we did see for the first time this year a true statement for why that would make sense, because damn well Vegas is probably the last team that the Dallas Stars would have picked, and they would have had their pick of the litter. They would have, and I think the Stars were going, for me, a cup favorite. But then if you lose, you beat the wrong matchup, you're done. They could have lost that series. They could have lost in Game 7, and Vegas had that really good chance. So it's the same thing in the other side of the bracket there. I mean, Oh, I don't think the Rangers would have changed their mind. Well, yeah, I guess they had the number one seed, so they would say it. But I'm saying, the Lightning, for example, like if they play Toronto, I think they win the first round, but they got the Panthers, who I think were a much better team, and so the Panthers beat them in 6 games, and that's how it went. Do you think Florida would have picked Toronto instead of Tampa? I think they might have. I would have. I mean, it depends, because there's a guy like Tkachuk there who's like, nah, give me Tampa. But I agree. I think they'd probably go Toronto. After what happened the previous year, yeah. I mean, not that Tampa was a juggernaut this year. They were playing better on the stretch, and they have Kucherov, and who didn't score a goal in that series, and Vasilevsky, who was playing better, and stuff like that. So, I mean, I thought they would probably pick Toronto. You saw Kachuk's comments too after the series, like, I don't want to get anybody mad at me and all, but we kind of knew that we'd be Boston. We'd be playing in this round. I love it. Hockey needs more of that stuff. So much more of that, please. All right. And so Minnesota kicks off tonight as the podcast drops. against Toronto, as we said. Our friend to the south, many people not aware, Toronto is south of the Twin Cities. Fun fact. Last thing we wanted to hit on before we tee up our boy Bruce. Coaching changes rampant. Obviously, just in the landscape of the NHL now, it's a win now thing. Teams have money to throw around. Changes are being made quick. Saw our most recent hiring with the Ottawa Senators here. And sorry, that's Travis Green. What does that mean for the remaining spots? Like, we still don't know if Sheldon Keefe is going to be gone. We know there's a vacancy in Seattle. I believe the Blues actually just named their replacement for
Bannister. Yeah, he was interim tag got removed from him, so he's
there. We go.
Let them go.
So, like, where does this all shuffle out? And is Dean Evason in the mix?
I think Dean Evason is definitely in the mix. He interviewed in Ottawa, and I think the perfect spot for him is in Seattle. Him and Ron Francis go back a long way, especially back into the Whalers back in the day. So I think, and he would be a good coach for that team from Kamloops out of Pacific Northwest. So I think that'd be a good spot for him. The problem, there are like a lot of really good coaches out there as well. Like Todd McClellan's available. Craig Berube is available, assuming he's not the next coach there in Toronto. Sheldon Keefe did get put out there for the exit interviews, so you don't know if that was a good sign or not. But they said they gave him the option, and he did. So I don't know. But Berube should be able to find a job this offseason. McClellan, there's guys like Dan Bylsma who did really well in the AHL, could get another chance. Jeff Blashill, assistant coach in Tampa, former Red Wings coach, is available. And I know David Carl's a hot name because he has the best program in college hockey now, as he put it.
Anywhere.
But if you're a guy who has makes so much money and you're the king of college hockey and you have a program that can run itself now, and you see there's 17 coaching changes since end of last season, you got to think to yourself, like, what kind of job security is that? So even some coaches of the year have gotten replaced within the next year. Right. So, I think there's a number of guys who are quote unquote retreads that'll get a chance to kick some of these other spots. LA still needs a coach. They haven't named their full head coach yet. And there could be some more coming out of these playoffs as well.
Yeah, that is for sure.
And Bruce wants to coach, as we said. Bruce on this podcast said he wants to still stay in it. So his phone's available if you want to give him a call. I think he'd love to coach again.
I'd love for him to coach again. But with that, we'll kick it over here to Bruce. This interview with Bruce Boudreau is brought to you by our friends at Waggle Golf. Waggle Golf believes what you wear on the course should reflect your individuality, who you are, where you're from, your hobbies, interests, and passions, all the stuff that makes you, you. That's why every design is inspired by the desire to create a piece of apparel that strikes a chord when you see it, that makes you say, wow, that was made for me. Because in a lot of ways, it was. Ready to get your waggle on? Go to getyourwaggleon.com. Use promo code SP10 to take 10% off your entire order. Joining the show today is one of us by way of being a first-round draft pick in the 1974 WHA draft by the Minnesota Fighting Saints, Minnesota Blue Hawks ownership group, and coaching your Minnesota Wild from 2016 through 2020, Bruce Boudreau. Thanks for jumping on, Bruce.
Hey, it's my pleasure. How are you guys today? Good.
Doing pretty well. You were in Vegas recently for the playoff series there. Just what's your schedule like now? Like, I know you want to stay busy and keep active with the game. Just what's overall been this time been like for you since you've been your last stint in Vancouver?
Well, you know what? I've been actually quite busy. I did a lot of Caps pre and post game, and then at the end of the season, they had an alternate feed, which I was doing like the Peyton Manning thing. So I was going from there to TSN in Toronto since the trade deadline. I've been working with them, and when I'm not doing that, then I then I'll go to the New York or New Jersey and do the NHL Network stuff. So I haven't been home much. So that's why we went to Vegas. I think we've been doing this for about 15 or 16 days straight. And I said, okay, we need a little bit of a break here. And so my wife loves going to Vegas. So that we went there for 3 or 4 days and had some fun.
Are you more of a gambler or like a show or going to a sports
I'm
book?
more of I lose and then she wins. And so she pays me back the money that she won. So to cover my losses. And it seems like I do okay.
You break even somehow.
I break even. Yes.
What's the go-to spot out there on the Strip?
Well, you know what? We've stayed at a lot of different places, but I mean, we were at Mandalay Bay this time, but I mean, we'll play slots and that's pretty well it. You know what? And it's just as expensive to do that, but we like going to the shows and we like, this trip, we got a chance to see Vegas play a couple times. So that was more important to me. But I mean, like the card games or the table games almost price you out. Like, I mean, you got to play now $20 minimum, $25 minimum. And I get too mad when I lose. So, I mean, I just sort of stay away from that.
I think that's why they give the guys debit cards now versus cash on the airplanes for their per diem, so that
yeah,
it's not all gone by the time to get off the plane. So.
I don't doubt it at all.
Well, as you know, this is a Fellowship of the Rink is a playoff of the Lord of the Rings movie, which we're both big fans of. And I was curious, do you have kind of like a nerd itch or nerddom that you like? You collect cards. Are you big into Star Wars? Like I saw the jukebox behind you. Do you collect jukeboxes? Like what's your? I guess if I'm a nerd for anything, it's wrestling.
Yeah. Okay.
I've followed since the early '80s. I guess it's probably even before that, but nobody knew about wrestling. And on Saturday afternoon and in Toronto, you'd watch it on Channel 2, which came from Buffalo, and the guys back there. I mean, that was in the early '70s and '60s. But I mean, I've followed wrestling most of my life, and got to meet a few of them recently, and they became like sort of friends. We're not hang out friends, but I mean guys that text back and forth every now and again. So and when the shows come into Hershey, I always go and watch them, and it's fun. So that's
who was the person you met, a wrestler that you met that were like maybe you had a little bit of awe factor there? Like,
well, there was Kevin Owens I met in at the Montreal Draft, and Jackie Redmond, who works for now does a lot of TV and works for the WWE on Raw. She, her and EJ Raddick sort of surprised me with Kevin coming in, and so I mean, met Adam Copeland a couple times, who's formerly known as Edge in the WWE. Now he's in AEW. But I mean, that's my real thing. I mean, when I was younger, I collected comics, and actually, up to about 15 years ago or 20 years ago, I had an unbelievable collection. But I mean, and ended up selling it. But other than that, it's all sports all the time with me. Baseball in the summer, watching, and hockey all winter long. I watch every game, or as many as I can see, and then football in the fall, college football. I mean, it's and then I live on a golf course, so I mean, I'm pretty well into sports stuff.
Man, that's quite the spread. And what was the go-to comic?
Comic?
Yeah,
Spider-Man. I had them all. I had one through 350 at one point, but I started collecting them in the early '60s when Marvel was just coming into play, and I had thousands of them. And the crazy thing is, I sold them because we wanted when I was in Hershey. And crazy thing, I wish to God I hadn't sold them, but I mean, sold them all because we wanted to finish our basement. It was just nothing there, so we had to do it from start to finish, and we didn't want to put a bar in there and everything else. We didn't have the money to do that, so we did it. We sold the comics, completed it, and then 4 days later, I got called up to the Capitals and at that point, I was so mad because then I could afford it with the raise. So it was crazy.
Crazy timing, man. And we'll talk right now, I guess, about just your transition from coaching into the media, which you've been doing a great job. Like you said, you've already been all over the networks. How tough was the transition from coaching to media, especially considering the locker room language that you frequently threw out?
Well, I don't swear at home or anything. So, I mean, it's been pretty easy to handle. And quite frankly, it started, Sportsnet called me after we lost out in Anaheim to do some of the stuff in Toronto. So I did that for the playoffs. And then all of a sudden the NHL Network phoned when we missed out or when I was done in Minnesota, and they called. And so, I mean, the great thing is, like, I mean, I just talk. It's just me, and like, it's just the knowledge of the game, I guess. And but I mean, I never think of myself as a media person. I still want to coach. So, I mean, I still this is sort of something to keep me involved in the game. Like, I mean, I know I'm getting a little long in the tooth for that, but I feel energetic and young. So I feel if anybody wanted me, I could still do the job. But it's just an extension of talking hockey and talking sports. And to me, that's not difficult. If I had to do any studying, I'd be in trouble. But I mean, with this, I just sort of shoot from the hip a little bit.
Yeah, fair. And are you familiar? I know, like you said, the swearing and stuff, not big outside of hockey, but inside of hockey, everyone knows about it. Became fabled from the HBO series, obviously. Are you familiar with the Nielsen show, TSN, and the Filthy Bruce segment that they would do when you were in Vancouver?
No.
It's basically them spoofing your post-game pressers and adding additional colorful language.
I try not to, whether I was had a great team and was doing well, or had a poor team and or it wasn't doing well, I never looked at myself on the media, I never read anything. So, I mean, all of these things, you've heard about them, but I would never turn them on or do anything of that sort. I mean, I like doing it, but I just don't like, even now, I would never, I just don't like looking at myself doing stuff on TV or video or anything like that. I mean, the thing I've seen myself most of is the HBO thing, where I threw about 40 F-bombs in about 25 seconds. And, what's interesting about that thing is that we knew they were in there all the time. And the HBO people were fabulous. But I had told them after we came in after the second period of that day, I said, can you guys leave? Because, I mean, I knew I was going to give it to the team pretty good. And they said, no, we're allowed to be in here. I said, okay, here goes. And like I've often told, whether I was coaching Mini or Washington or whatever, I mean, it doesn't happen all the time, but I say, listen, boys, I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth right now, but here it goes. And then you start on something and you just build up and it gets into a rant. And like, I mean, I've said some of the stupidest things in these rants. I remember in Mississippi one night, in the East Coast League, I was going, was losing it a little bit. And I said, you got to take the bull by the cows and the horns got to go somewhere. And they're all looking at me and going, like, what the hell is he talking about? And I said, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just talking. Shut up.
Oh, man, that's straight out of Tommy Boy. Like, it's got to be the butcher.
Yeah. So anyway, but I'm not worried about the swearing and that. I mean, there's a place for it. And I mean, let's face it, athletes when they're in their private settings, they use those words a lot. And it's the same as if you go to movies, you're not allowed to swear, but every movie has swearing in it. It's like, I don't get it. Like, I mean, they start at 8 years old. I remember when they'd say, hey, don't watch Slapshot. Your kids are too young. And now every kid that's 10 years old has seen the movie if you're a hockey fan.
There was a few times in your career where you'd only had maybe a few days in between your coaching jobs, so you didn't really have a lot of downtime in between. But when you had some more time, like, do do any more studying up on, or shadow anybody, or do anything like that, or is it mostly just kind of watching the games or talking to people to kind of stay? Because you have not been you've been down to the game rep very long, so not like you have to like go refresh anything. So
No, I'm pretty sure I'm pretty knowledgeable about the change, and if there's been a change in the game. Like, I mean, I don't have to talk to anybody. I watch all of them. I see the systems, the way they play, and everything else, and they're pretty knowledgeable about that. So, I mean, you're right. This is the longest I've been away from coaching in my life. I mean, or being actually part of either playing or coaching. And so, I mean, but if you stay up with the times, I mean, I don't have to study books or anything. I just have to watch and see what's going on to be pretty knowledgeable, whether the changes that have been made in power plays, the changes that have been made in systems, and how it's going back and forth. I mean, it was only 15 years ago that Guy Boucher was in Tampa, and he was doing the 1-3-1, and everybody, matter of fact, Laviolette was there and in Philly, and they stopped the game because they wouldn't advance the puck. And now you look at everybody's doing either the 1-3-1, the 1-1-3. It's almost the 1-2-2 in the neutral zone is morphed into something else. And so, I mean, you just got to stay on top of that. It's the same as D zone coverage. Used to be, a lot of zone, and now it's more man-to-man, where and the defense don't leave the front of the net or don't go above the dots type thing. And that started, I think, more with Bruce Cassidy, and then it went to Jim Montgomery, and Bruce did it in Vegas, and so you see that coming out a lot. So, I mean, it's a lot of different things like that. It's that you see changing, but I mean, not different. It used to be on the penalty kill, for example, it was always either a 2-2 or 1-3. Now it's all 1-3s. Like, I mean, and so, I mean, it's, you see how those things go. I was always studying the power play. So, I mean, you try to see when teams are playing in zone, how to break it and how to get around your what they're trying to do. So, I mean, watching the game like that, that's what I study.
And what do you think about the other side of the coin, though? Like, obviously, you're very on top of the X's and O's. What do you think about the changes from like your early days getting called up to Washington to what you're seeing now with how to manage this generation of player? Like, a little bit softer is definitely the wrong word, but you can't really be on them the way you used to unless you're John Tortorella out in Philly.
Well, you know what? And that wears thin after a while too. But I mean, and I've never changed in that way. And I've always believed in one thing, that it's my job as a coach to find what I call the Achilles heel on every player. And first of all, you got to get to know them a little bit. And then what might work with some guy doesn't work with the other guy. I mean, some guys might need a kick in the butt. Other guys need a pat on the back. Other guys, earlier on, you could take ice time away, or you could find them. But I mean, I got to find what makes that guy tick. Like, I mean, and when I'd go around the room and talk to them, you look at the guys that if I called out somebody in the room, that, I mean, I want them to say, oh yeah, I'm going to show you. And that's what you want from them. That's the reaction. But some guys now, the younger guys, some of them cower. Some of these guys, when they're younger, have not been disciplined at all, ever, because from 11 years old or 10 years old, they've been, given everything because they're great players, right? And so, I mean, sometimes they take it a little more difficult. You got to put your arm around them and ask them things. For an example, Mike Green, I found out early on in Washington, when I had him in Hershey, that if I went down the bench and I started screaming at him, there was nothing. He was lost for the day. So, I mean, I'd found that I'd have to, if he wasn't doing well, I'd have to go up to him and put my arm around him and say, Mike, I need you tonight. You're not playing very well. He didn't want anybody else to know that I was yelling at him. So, I mean, then you'd have other guys where I really believe, and it's whether now or whether it was 100 years ago, I mean, is something that their whole thought is, I won't care about you until you care about me. So I wanted to get to know, their wife's name, their kids. And for example, one day, Matt Hendricks, who was one of my favorite players ever, he had about 2 or 3 bad practices in a row. And I went up to him and I said, Matt, you're not working. What's going on? This isn't you. And he said, well, I got both my kids have croup. I'm up all night. So I just said, you take 2 days off. You go take with your kids, and they not only respect that, they say, okay, you're doing that for me. I'm going to go overboard and do something for you. So, you can call that a player's coach or not. I just call it common sense. If you want them to play your best, how do I get the best out of these guys? And that's one of the ways. So when you ask the original question, whether you're 20 years old or 35 years old, it's the same thing, getting to know them. With Pettersson, it was the same. He was like Mike Green. I got to know him a little bit, and we would talk all the time, and I get to know what he wants and everything else. He felt comfortable telling me these things. So, you have a great rapport. And I think almost everybody, that was my strength as a coach, is having the rapport with the people or with the players. And I might not have been the genius in X's and O's or line changes or what, but I knew they would all play hard for me because they knew I would go to bat for them.
It's crazy to look at now, Bruce. There's been 17 coaching changes since the end of last season. Could be more in the coming weeks because of, after the playoffs are over. And I was curious from your perspective, what do you think's changed the most or led to the fact that there's so many more, it seems like more coaching changes each now than there were maybe 15 years ago, as far as in over a course of a 1 year span? Maybe I'm wrong, but is there something that's maybe more pressure or the salary cap or just expectations?
I just think it's all the owners are so rich. Okay. They saw Bill Foley in Vegas win, and right from the get-go. And so it's a win now league. And listen, coaches make a lot of money as compared to the outside world, but as compared to what players make and the terms of the coaches, very few of them make money that the owners and teams can't absorb because it's not involved in the salary cap, and they're the easiest guys to go. Every team that sort of has their exit meetings, and you can see it every year, that if the management, it used to be the coaches just had exit meetings and would report early on to the GM and say, did you find anything out in there in the exit meetings? Now the coaches have exit meetings, the GMs have exit meetings, and if the players say, hey, I can't play for him, it's the coach that goes. And I think that's happened a little bit this year, even though they won't tell you. In the exit meetings, if enough of the players show displeasure, or the top player says, hey, I'm going to want out if this guy's back, then the coach is the guy that's going to be gone.
Yeah, that's fair. And you talked about wanting to get back into coaching. Obviously, this being the landscape that it is, if you're sitting there and evaluating potential coaching opportunities, how do you actually go about that evaluation of do I want to actually join this organization or not?
Well, I don't think in those terms. I think there's 32 jobs, and you should be blessed and lucky if you get any one of them. I've never chosen. When I went to Washington, we were in last place in the league. When I went to Anaheim, they were last place in the league. When I went to Minnesota, they had just come off a really bad year where they at one point they lost 13 or 14 in a row and barely slipped into they'd fired their coach 3/4 of the way through. Vancouver, I took over the last place in the league, last place team in the league. So I've never been picky at where I'm going, and it just, you take it and you go, wow, what an opportunity. You either fear it because you're going into a team that hasn't been doing well, or you think of the positives that can come out of it if you end up doing well. And I've been lucky enough in each of those occasions. The only time I've ever had a losing record, quite frankly, is the last year in Vancouver. And I could talk about that for about 2 hours, but I think I'd be in a lot of trouble when it would be all over. So, so I'll just keep quiet about that year. But
next episode, yeah,
yeah, that's like I said once before, and got a lot of trouble. That's a chapter in a book that I'll never write.
Let's talk about the positive of that, though. Like, the fans overwhelmingly were on your side as all of that transpired. Like, how cool was it just to see that support from the community?
It was amazing, and I still get it everywhere I go. And I still tell my wife, I can't believe, that the people are still like that supportive of me. And I thought they were amazing. And Vancouver's a tough market, but I mean, it's again one of those things. If you fear the tough market and the tough questions, then you're going to lose. But if you embrace it and think of what can happen if you have success, like, I mean, then it's an awful lot better. And Vancouver it'll always have a place in my heart. I mean, it was a great place, and some of those players that they got some really good players that were really good people, and a lot of misinformation. When I went there, I was getting calls. Oh, this is a terrible locker room. It's this, it's that. They were great. They were all great.
Well, it reminds me of the fact that what made that situation even more unique was you really get to say goodbye to your players or know it's coming, right? Usually, if you're a coach, you're probably like, like in Minnesota, you didn't know it was coming, right? Like for Vancouver, you had that time. I guess how emotional was that scene in the locker room when for your last game? Like, I don't know if you can paint a picture of what that was like. Probably surreal thing.
Well, it was really, I mean, unique, and I don't know if it's ever happened in any sport like that where I knew the day that I was getting fired. I knew the day like 8 weeks before, and it was crazy. But I mean, so when the fans at the end of that game stood up and stayed in the seats and gave me the ovation, and the players all came around the bench and tapped their sticks, and like, it gets pretty emotional. And then very, very few coaches of any sport get a chance to address the team after they know they're getting fired. They haven't been fired yet, but I mean, they know they're getting fired the next day. Because, like, for example, in Minnesota, when Billy Guerin told me, it was right after I had a meeting with the players, and before I was ready to go on the ice when he came in and told me. And then, so you don't want to see anybody there, and then you just leave out the back door, and they'll text you or phone you, and that's great. But here I got to address and thank all the players for everything they did and the support they gave me, and it was great. And then each player, almost to a man, I think that maybe 20 out of the 24 guys came into my office and said goodbye to me privately, and I thought that was pretty amazing. I mean, you can't make that up, or you can't manufacture that. It was just real, So I thought, if you got to go, this is as good a way to go as any.
For sure. And I mean, on the Wild, how crazy was it to be here for a 4-year span, but serve under 3 different GMs? There it is.
It was pretty unique.
Yeah.
And a quick story too. Like, there was one episode when Billy was GM, and we were flying, and I like, he lost oxygen or something, and he fell in the plane, and he hit his head on the side, and all I could think of, I can't go through another GM. I mean, we had the doctors and everything up there like this, and he was fine, which was great. But I'm going, another GM? What's going on here?
But he was fine, though. He made it out all right. But
yeah, no, he was fine. I just think that maybe the sudden altitude or something caught him in a different way, and he just sort of fainted. But,
during that stretch, a lot of crazy things happened over that time, but the weirdest had to be the first true, to today at least, expansion draft. Were you involved in those conversations leading up to the 2017 Vegas expansion?
Was I involved? Well, Chuck was the GM back then, yep. And he would tell me the dilemma that we had, and what he, I didn't know in the end what he was going to do, but he knew we had 5 really good defensemen, and that was the core of our team, and that we didn't have very much money on the cap. So, I mean, to stop them from, say, taking Matt Dumba, and I may be wrong on this, I mean, we had to offer up Alex Tuck, who had played only 1 year in the minors, and so they wouldn't take a Matt Dumba, who at that time was, still pretty young, and he was a real up-and-comer, and I think it was the next year he had 12 goals in December until he tore his labrum, and I think it became a little more difficult. He missed the rest of the year, and became a little more difficult for him. But, I mean, when you think you had Suter, Spurgeon, Brodin, Scandella, and Dumba, and you were allowed to keep all of them, and then the way we got we traded Scandella for I think Pominville at that time, but it gave us enough money on the cap to pick up Eric Stahl, which was a great pickup. So it was like as bad as it looked, because you lose out on Alex Tuck. I think Chuck did as good a job as he could in that moment in saving, keeping the same team that he had.
Like the 2 names that will be forever in lore here are Parise and Suter, for good and for, I'm sure, bad if you're a fan, right? Like the moment of hope that they gave that when they signed and picked Minnesota to be their long-term destination, and then the exit, which they're still paying for with the dead cap hits. Like, you were around those guys. Like, do you understand the reasoning for the buyout, or do you see anything that would make them the team in a better spot in the culture, in the room, by having those guys maybe not there?
Well, I mean, I think it wasn't any conversations that I'd had with anybody, but I think they were looking for younger leadership, and they had just, Eriksson was starting to make his presence aware, and Spurgeon was starting to be great, and they wanted different leadership guys in there. So I think they wanted just to say, okay, we got these guys for, they were supposed to be 13 years. I don't know how many years they bought them out after 8 or 9, but I mean, and they wanted just a different culture of leadership there, because they moved Mikko out, and they got rid of all the 3 guys that were the leaders on the team. And I don't know if Bill had talked to, he didn't talk to me about it, but I mean, I don't know if he had talked to, at that time, whether it was Dean or any of the players, and they thought that this was just a bad fit and we have to make the move now. And I mean, I'm sure, the ownership knew about it and everything else, and they were okay with it. But I mean, I think, they made a great draft that year. I think, or the year before, with Paul Fenton drafted Boldy, and they got Rossi that year. And I mean, those guys are going to be, solid for years to come. And now that they've got Faber, I mean, they got the good young nucleus, I think, of what Billy Guerin was looking for when he made that change.
How do you see the Wild now? Like, obviously, when you fire a coach during the year, that there's maybe some underachieving or some frustration there. But you mentioned the young core. Like, where do you see the Wild right now? Like, this kind of who they probably should be while the buyouts are still in play. Like, missing $14.7 million. Should they be more of a playoff team? Like,
well, I mean, I think it always boils down to goaltending. I don't care who you are and what team you're with. I mean, if your goaltending is good, and I mean, you're going to usually be in the playoffs. I mean, you look at, I didn't have the luxury of having Kaprizov, but I mean, you got one of the best players in the world there, and you've got, I think Eriksson has proven he may not be score 40, but every year he surprises you and scores more and plays in every situation, and he's tougher than nails. And I mean, I love the guy. I mean, quite frankly, as far as the player goes, Ryan Hartman has proven that he was, I played him like Chicago did, and Nashville did, and Philadelphia did, 3rd or 4th line right winger. Now he became a 2nd line center. I mean, out of necessity. And he's still there, and he's having a good career. I mean, Zuccarello, I don't know, what is he, 36 next year or something? I mean, but he can still, and he didn't score as often as he would have liked to this year, but he still, his chemistry with Kaprizov is still fabulous. Next year, you'll have Spurgeon back with Faber and Brodin, and I think the defense will be better overall. So, I mean, I don't know if they're going to be a playoff team, but I do think that they've got great character, on that team, and I think they'll be fighting for the playoffs all the time. And that's they just got some good nucleus. Even Marcus Foligno is a great leader and a great team guy. I mean, and you got him on the. If you can use him on the third line, then I think you've got the nucleus of a good top 9 forwards. So I mean, it's I don't see them taking a step back. I think they took a step back this year, but I think once the coaching change was made, Boldy became the player that you expect him to be, and so I mean, I think they'll be right up there next year. I don't know how much money they have. I haven't paid attention to that. Whether they can get 1 or 2 good free agents to mix in with what they've got, because they're young and they've got experience. And so, I mean, I expect them to be a tough out next year.
Where's Kaprizov in terms of one of the top players in the world in your mind? Like, I got a chance to watch him now 2 years in a row, where like I'm like that wow factor of I think he's a top 10 player, top 10, 12 player in the world. And
if you take away the top 20, the 25 games that he was horrible at the beginning of the year, and he still got 40 plus goals. So, I mean, I got to believe he's a top 10 player. I think there's going to be a time, and it may be as early as next year, where he's going to get 50 plus, and if like their power play is still solid, and they still don't have they use Brock on the point a lot, and maybe that's going to be his spot. Like, I mean, but I mean, it wasn't that spot until Spurgeon got hurt. But I mean, they got the nucleus. I mean, Ek in front of the net, Kaprizov, Zuccarello. I mean, they got a great Boldy in the bumper. They can have one of the best power plays in the league. So I don't understand, or I don't see why it shouldn't be where they're one of the better power plays. And Kaprizov is not a 50 goal, if he stays healthy, is not a 50 plus goal guy next year.
I mean, don't draw up the exact X's and O's, but like talking about that group and the strengths of the different players, like what would Bruce Boudreau look at and say, like, here's what I really want to do to try and get the best out of those guys on the power play?
Well, I mean, here's what you do is just think of the 5 guys. Think, first of all, I mean, Zuccarello's not a shooter. He's a passer. Okay. Kaprizov, I would probably have on the half wall, Zuccarello on his forehand, so he could give Boldy the puck in the middle. And Ek is good a front man. He takes a shit kicking and just keeps coming back at you. Like, I mean, he's the perfect forward, and he never complains. He's in better shape than anybody. So, I mean, you got all the things there. Like when I was in Vancouver, and you had Bo Horvat in the middle, and you had JT Miller on the forehand, and he could come down with a great shot, or he could fake it and give it to Bo. And Bo had 31 goals before I got let go, and before he got traded. So, I mean, I see that like that, because Boldy's that kind of shooter there. And so, I mean, you just see the makings of a really good power play. And Kaprizov, when he gets it, if you think of McDavid, and McDavid never stays in one place. If Kaprizov has the puck, he could go behind the net and around the net and around and find open guys. And the minute you take your eye off Zuccarello, he'll shoot the puck. A little bit like if you think of Kucherov in Tampa, who, I mean, he's got Point, Hedman, Stamkos and he's a playmaker, and the puck, it runs through him. So, I mean, but if you take your eye off him, he's shooting the puck in the net. And I see Minnesota having a power play like that.
We would love that. And I'm going to do some zigzagging here, but you talked about Bo Horvat. He's over on the island now, and his new coach, Patrick Waugh, I just need you to talk me through what's going through your mind when he is banging on the glass, coming over and looking for blood.
Well, first of all, fear is going through my mind. I mean, I didn't even know. One of my assistants had to tap me on the shoulders and say, Patrick is coming after you right now. And because it was so stupid. It was his first game ever coaching in the NHL. And they were leading, I think it was 5-0. We scored a goal. Jacob Silverberg scored a goal with 5 seconds to go in the game to make it 5-1. The game was over. And I didn't think. I just let the same group. It was Bolesky, maybe Koivu and or Saku Koivu and Silverberg on the ice. And Matt Bolesky would fight you, but I mean, he wasn't a heavyweight by any stretch of the matter. And that's just 5 seconds, stay on the ice. And he throws some tough guys out there, and the puck comes over to the boards, and they start pushing us after the whistle. And Corey Perry was there squirting water on them, and I think that got Patrick going, and he pushed the glass over. And once I found out I got to protect my players, and started screaming back at him, and then I saw his eyes roll back in his head, and I go, "Uh-oh, hold on, glass, stay strong."
Yeah. Do you talk to him after that? Did you ever patch up afterwards, or
I met
have
him
a conversation?
the next year at the draft, and he said he apologized for losing it, or it was a couple years later. But I mean, hey, no worries, Patrick. It's all part of the game,
Another guy well, you mentioned Russian superstar Kaprizov, and I'm sure you coached a lot of goals out of Ovechkin in your time there. Getting closer to an all-time record. I know much was talked about. Russo talked to you a bit for a story about Ovechkin in his playoffs. Is it close to father time with him catching up, or is it just more so of some guys just have a rough playoffs? It's just even the best of them.
Everybody has a bad portion, a bad playoff, a bad season. I mean, maybe Gretzky was the only one that never had a bad year. But I mean, I think Alex learned a lot this year, and I think he'll come back better next year. I think maybe he realizes that once you're getting a little older, you have to maybe work a little harder in the summer because everything came so easy. And now I have no idea. I'm just guessing on this thing. But I mean, he saw how his year went. I'm sure he wasn't 100% happy, even though he got 31 goals. But I mean, he's a really smart individual, and he'll say, okay, I got to do this better and that better. And he'll train accordingly to get those spots better. So, I mean, it was a little tough for him, but I also had Timu. When Timu, my first year and second year in Anaheim, was our leading scorer. But by his third year, when he was 44 years old, sometimes you just get old, it just happens overnight almost that you can't do what you did in the year previous. So, I mean, I don't know if it's going to, if it happened this year to Alex or if he can readjust. I'm hoping he can readjust. He's too great a person and too good a guy that he's fought for 19 years to do this, and hopefully he can get it done next year. It'd be a tough task to score 42 next year, but I mean, at least get close enough that he can go one more year. I think he's got 2 years left on his deal.
Do you think he's got the right cast around him right now, or is that not even a factor when you're talking about a guy like Ovechkin?
Well, I mean, to me, they have to change the power play a bit. It became way too stagnant, and I think they need maybe one more offensive weapon. I think it really hurt when Nicky couldn't play this year, and Kuznetsov didn't, whatever problems he had didn't work well. That became, because when you think about it, if Dylan Strome was your third line center after those two, if I'm looking at it in September, I'm going, hey, we've got a pretty good squad here, and pretty good offensive when you think, okay, Oshie, if he's healthy, and Wilson and Alex, and now you get Pacioretty, and you're going, yeah, we're a little old, but these are all offensive weapons, and it just didn't work out. But I would venture to guess that they'll get 3 or 4 guys up from Hershey next year, like they did this year, and they were all good players. When you're looking at McMichael and Protas and Blake Mallenstein in the defense, because Hershey's team is by far the best team in the American League. So I mean, they'll graduate a couple players, I'm sure. So if they've got a little bit of money, if they can do the right moves at the right positions, I think that they will really try to get a centerman that would really help Alex out, and I think that would be great.
Who's your Stanley Cup pick now that you've seen the first part of the playoffs? Who's the team that to be?
It's you know what? I'll tell you who I was. I originally had Colorado against Florida in the end, but I was so, and I mean, obviously I love George McPhee and would like Vegas to do really well. But I'll tell you, when I saw Game 3 in Vegas, the speed of that Dallas team impressed me so much. Like, I mean, if it wasn't for Logan Thompson, that might have been a 9-2 game. But I was going, wow. Like, I mean, things happen in such a hurry for those guys. And, now that it's 3-2 Dallas, I mean, it's going to be really interesting. I think Vegas will win the next game, and then Game 7, who knows? But one of those teams are really good, and I didn't think Colorado would have such an easy time with Winnipeg, but they did. And so Edmonton looks like just a wagon right now defensively, and if you give them a chance on the power play, I mean, it's lights out. And usually what happens in the playoffs as the rounds go on and on, you get less and less penalties. So, I mean, that's, if you just look at history, I mean, that's what happens. So I don't know if they'll how they'll do, but I mean, it's going to be Carolina, the Rangers. I haven't mentioned those two. Those two teams are great. And let alone, I mean, I still believe Boston's going to win. I don't think they could do this again 2 years in a row. But I mean, and with Matthews not playing tonight again, but boy, would that make a storyline if the Leafs win or lose, it's going to be a storyline. Let me tell you that.
Yeah.
How does it affect the Leafs?
Yeah. I was just in Tampa, Bruce, for exit interviews, and talking about signing Stamkos and Hedman, and you've seen all the teams over the years, the Kings and Blackhawks and Penguins, go through the cup runs and kind of go that inevitable decline. Do you think Tampa still has some of that group where they can make another run at it? I don't think you can see anything that compares to what you've seen maybe than the teams that I just talked about, the Penguins and like the Blackhawks and stuff like that went through it.
Yeah, I mean, Hedman's in his 30s now. I mean, Vasilevsky, we keep talking about him, but I mean, it's been 2 years there. I thought he's been pretty normal now. And is that the norm, or is he's going to get, this year with a whole summer of training? We still think everybody still thinks he's the best in the world, but to me, my jury's out. Let's see. Kucherov is 30, but he's still so good. I love Braden Point. Stamkos is as good a power play guy as you're going to have, but I think he's limited, quite frankly, if the power play isn't successful for him. I mean, I hope he signs with Tampa, and he deserves to be there his whole career, and he's been incredible there. But I mean, time will tell. But I mean, their third and fourth line and the bottom three defensemen have really got to be improved upon for them to stay at the level I think that they want to stay at.
Well, you're a big golfer, Bruce. I wasn't sure if you are or not.
Well, I'm big, and I golf. I mean,
okay.
Aren't we all? Yeah.
Let's kick our final question here from
I live on a golf course too, so I mean, it's I'm out there all the time.
So no excuses, right?
No excuses.
So last question here from our friends at Waggle Golf. GetYourWaggleOn.com, promo code SP10 to take 10% off. Bruce, dead or alive, don't care if they're in sports, entertainment, whatever.
Wrestling.
Yeah, it's going to be 3 wrestlers. Yeah. Who's in your dream golf foursome?
Oh, really? Okay. That's interesting. You got to give me a chance to think for a second.
Yeah.
But one would be Mickey Mantle. One would be
Okay.
Jim Brown, and I have to think of maybe Jack Nicklaus. I mean, those
Wow.
would be three guys that I've admired in everything they've done. Mickey Mantle, growing up, was being a Yankee fan, was my favorite ball player. Jim Brown. Growing up, Cleveland was my favorite team. Still are. I've suffered many years with them, believe me. But I mean, and I got an autographed jersey from him, from a Cleveland jersey. So that's hanging up in my house. So that's that. And Jack Nicklaus just was the greatest golfer. If we're golfing, I mean, it would make sense. And him or guys like it would be him, or like I'm more into the older guys. Like, I mean, Ben Hogan, Arnold Palmer, those guys would be going. But as it turns out, I was allowed to pick who I could play with at the Tiger Woods Pro-Am, like when my second year in Washington. And the guy that got me at it said, you could pick Phil, you could pick anybody. I mean, you could pick Tiger, but then Tony Romo came in, and I couldn't pick Tiger anymore. But I picked Mike Weir because he was Canadian, and he just won the Masters. So I mean, they're going, you do all this, and you pick Mike Weir, and I said, well, I'm proud Canadian, yeah.
So who's riding in the cart with you?
Like at that time?
No. Who's gonna ride in the cart with you for your foursome there?
Oh wow! I mean, I'd have to go to a hockey player and be Bobby Orr.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
When you got to pair up with your fellow Canadian for that Pro-Am, like any crazy Canadianisms or any stories swapped that are noteworthy?
Well, here's the story. Okay, and I know you got to go here, but so when I found out I'm playing with Mike Weir, and we were playing in the group directly behind Tiger, we were but we played the first hole together. So I made the Caps go get me 2 signed Ovechkin jerseys, and so met Tiger, and I said, Tig, Alex Ovechkin signed jersey, would like to, on behalf of the Capitals, give it to you. And here's the difference. He said, oh, thanks, and he stuffed it in his hockey bag, right, or his golf bag. And I went, okay. And then Mike Weir came up, and I said, Mike, on behalf of the Caps, I'd like to give you a hockey jersey. Now, Tiger's never really been a hockey fan, but Mike Weir's Canadian and has been. And he just went, oh my God. And then he told his caddy, he says, you go put this in the back seat of my car. Don't put anything on it. Nothing. I want that like that. And I went, all right, that's it. So
love that. And then Tiger, you see him later, he's like cleaning divots off his club.
Well, you know what? Yeah, I did. We played the first hole together at Congressional, and the 10th, we started on the 10th. It used to be, it's the 10th. It was just a par 3 over water, and he put it in the water. I put it on the green, and 2-putted. And I told him as he was leaving, I'm 1 up. You want to play? And he just gave me the sneer and went away.
And talk trash with the best of them. There you go. So.
I mean, he hit from about 80 yards behind me. I mean, they play the pros, we play the up tees. But I mean, that I don't usually tell in the story.
No, we'll delete that. Don't worry.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it, and thanks to Crystal for helping with the audio there too.
No problem.
Looking forward to seeing NHL Network.
Hope I didn't bore you to death. So you guys have a great day.
No, never. Appreciate it, Bruce.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you again to Bruce for jumping on with us. Always a character. You could tell he kind of tiptoed into it, but just getting him to go off on the nerd itch there with wrestling and comic books, he was very about it once he warmed up to it.
And I knew he was into wrestling. I remembered that, but I figured he would go all in if you just say it's like you're a nerd itch. But comic book thing kind of surprised me. I didn't know that was coming a lot of left field, but I saw him do interviews on WWE before and stuff. And he looks like a wrestler too. He looks like one of those kind of he looks like he would have one of those kind of personas to be in there. So good to have him on. And I had never heard the Bill Guerin story on the airplane either. So interesting.
Yeah. Anyone out there that's an Always Sunny in Philadelphia fan, just picture Bruce Boudreau as the trash man. All right. Well, let's kick off then for our good friends at Barrel Theory Beer Co. Keyboard Warriors. And again, we know the season is over for the Minnesota Wild. Going to have to wait until October to get the delicious in-rink offering from Barrel Theory. Events all summer between food trucks, great beer releases, and I know they've got a couple of fun things up their sleeve. Best way for you to follow up on that, go to Facebook, go to Instagram, make sure that you follow, subscribe, whatever, anything that our good friends at Barrel Theory Beer Company are pushing out. So, Joe, there's a little bit of a theme to the hot takes that I was able to surmise this week. And it kind of goes along with anything that hockey media would usually say, being, how does it affect the Leafs? First one here that I have to throw, and this wasn't even on social media per se. This is actually a video directly from Mitch Marner being interviewed after the series ended. And it leads to him saying, which people were very, very calm and sane about, we're looked upon as kind of gods here. Seems like a really aggressive pull after yet another disappointing postseason.
It was, but it was also the truth. If you've ever been around Toronto and the Leafs, it's like I'd rather have him say that than split cliches, right? I think
Totally.
and he was asked in context of, would you want to sign here long term? His answer was, yeah, it's great. And this is why he likes that as much as I'm sure he hates it at times. Like I'm sure if you give him some truth serum, he'd be like, man, it's a pain in the ass to play here sometimes. Like, they're on me all the time. This is like, anytime I don't have a goal in 3 games, like I'm the worst player in the world. Like, and he's talked about that before too. But I think when you're from that area, you grew up with it, you always wanted to be a Leaf. You're one of the biggest stars in the Leafs, one of the highest paid players in the Leaf. Like, I'm sure that's got to be a pretty nice overall, a lot of perks to that of being in that city and playing for a team that just has this, unquenchable thirst for hockey interest, stories or personalities or anything. So that's in the context of that way that was said. I didn't mind it. It just more so the optics of it don't look quite as good when he didn't have quite the performance in the first round. They end up losing the first round. And yeah, I'm sure all the guys that make over $10 million love it, even if they don't, it's hard to complain, you still get the same roster every year. No, there are no consequences to it, right? Just keep on.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
So, the question I think is will this be the last year he plays with the Toronto Maple Leafs?
Yeah, and that goes into our next one here. We've got a double down from JFresh Hockey, which anyone out there that doesn't follow him, like at the forefront of anything, whether you want to call it advanced analytics, fancy stats, I don't care. Guy crushes it. And he loves to poke fun at Toronto, but he says in a vacuum, Marner for Pietrangelo trade would fit the Vegas MO. Replace aging Pietrangelo with Hanifin, replacing aging Marchessault with Marner. And the Toronto aim, number 1 right-handed D with cup rings, but Vegas is still playing number 7 as their 1D this postseason, so probably not. But he expands on that, saying, for the record, my official gutsy Leafs summer prediction is that they will trade Marner for Pietrangelo, hire Berube, strip Tavares of the C, and give it to Pietrangelo. Spicy.
I see where he's going there, and obviously respects his work too, like you said. And I can see the Berube thing happening for sure.
Yeah.
They're definitely not stripping the C from John Tavares. They're just not going to do it. It very rarely happens this side of Rick Bowness that you strip a C from somebody, and for him to be brought back for that, like if he's here, like how many more years does Tavares have on his contract, right? Like one.
That's the real reason that I agree with you. But otherwise, I would actually contend, like we've seen, yes, there's no Stanley Cups to show for it, but pretty largely successful organization for over a decade in San Jose. They stripped Marlowe. They stripped Thornton. Like, at a certain point, you have to say, like, what's happening here isn't okay. And if that means a leadership change is part of ripping off that Band-Aid and sending a shockwave through the locker room, so be it. I think the easier move, to your point, and especially with it being 1 year left for Tavares, new coach, trade Marner. But it's Toronto. I won't discount anything.
Oh, I don't discount it. I'm just saying, knowing the personalities there, knowing how much he's beloved, he hasn't done anything wrong necessarily, kind of thing. And he is your kind of typical captain character. But I do see the Berube thing as a possibility. And I do see Marner, only it's just very difficult because he has a full no move and he doesn't want to go anywhere. Won't. And number two, I mean, if you convince him, like you're very limited in places that you can trade him to, and that mitigates your return, which I guess is better losing him for nothing.
Do you think that Vegas is a place that he wouldn't be willing to go to? That'd be high on my list for where to trade me. Tax benefits, a competitive team, and again, he's got 1 year left. So if he knows his future isn't in Toronto, like I'm gonna waive if it's going to an okay situation, but that's me.
Play with Jack Eichel, whatever, Yeah. So like, I think like the way it's matched up, or like as far as cap hits and as far as needs for certain teams, especially if Marchessault walks in free agency, I can see whether two logical fits there. It's just more so of the idea of two guys, established guys, like Pietro already moved from St. Louis to Vegas and signed a long-term deal there. Like, I think he's probably going to want to stay there, Like, I don't know what's the benefit for him.
His no move is the real reason that I don't think this will ever happen. I don't think he says yes to that trade, but
yeah,
it is Toronto. You never know, but I'd be very surprised if they could talk Pietrangelo into packing up the minivan and heading out.
Would you, if you were Pietrangelo, leave?
No, God, no.
Yeah,
no way.
I mean,
no way.
You're not getting a pay bump. You're getting half your money in taxes taken away. Like, I don't, like it's.
I think that gets made up though in any kind of sponsorship deal he can come up with in Toronto, and I think it's rampant. But no, I don't think he wants to leave. I think Vegas is a place he wants to be, both geographically, financially. It's going to be a competitive team for a while. No, I don't see him agreeing, and I think that's the reason that this has no chance of happening. Outside of that, I think it's a pretty interesting premise. Mm-hmm. My take, though, on the flip is I say Mitch Marner goes to the New York Islanders. I think it works in his favor because it is a quieter market, dramatically quieter market than what we're seeing with Toronto, especially when you're overshadowed now by the New Jerseys, by the New York Rangers. He obviously has familiarity with Lou Lamoriello, which maybe that's good or bad. I don't know. We know that he can't grow facial hair, so we know Lou is all on board to bring him in without any questions. But I also think that there's like viable trade options there too. Like the one that I lead with, and maybe people disagree because they think that a top defenseman needs to be the priority if there's going to be any kind of Marner deal. I think you look at Mitch Marner for Ilya Sorokin, because I am super high on Ilya Sorokin's talent, and I don't think he's happy after last season with Patrick Waugh coming in, throwing him to the pine, favoring his boy that he's worked with in the past, Semyon Varlamov. There's going to be ruffled feathers there, and he's about to kick off the beginning of a big boy deal that pays only $3 million less than Mitch. So whether it's some kind of retention on Mitch or there's another player going back as part of the trade, I think that could work really well. But then there's also like, okay, you can find some kind of package that includes either Pelech, Pulak, or real dark horse Brock Nelson could be pretty interesting as part of the return if they're really focused on what they can do come postseason time.
Well, I think in a sense, because Toronto needs a goalie, right? Or if they're not convinced that Wall is that guy, and maybe he is that guy. I mean, he shown flashes and stuff like that. But if one of the major changes that the Maple Leafs want to do is in net, I think he's one of those guys that would make sense, or would be a guy you would try to go after. I mean, let's look at the free agency. Who are the goalies that are being free agency right now? I mean, if you wanted the limited goalies, I mean,
Markstrom's on the trade market. We know that.
Markstrom, like Gibson's in the trade market, maybe Gustavsson, like
I feel like Gibson's been on the trade market for like 6 years now.
yeah, it's tough. I mean, when you sign that big deal, then you take yourself off of that market sometimes because of how hard it is. So,
I think to your point though, that actually maybe bolsters it a little bit. I think Wall showed a lot, and I think he can absolutely be in a tandem. And we've seen Sorokin work really well in a tandem with Semyon Varlamov before it was like completely flipped to where Varley just took over. I think if you've got a 1A of Sorokin and a 1B of Wall, and you see how both of them progress, like I think that could be a really strong tandem for a team that's never really solidified the goaltending position.
Yeah, I mean, like I think that's the thing you look at with the Leafs is like, oh, the weaknesses are in theory the blue line and the goaltending because they take care of their forwards up front. And but you look at the last 13 playoff games, their trouble has been scoring, right? They have an issue losing a lot of these 2-1 games. I think 2 goals or fewer in a good chunk of them. Like for spending all that money on their forwards, they don't get the return on that in the playoff time, So you're trying to move some from your strengths to move to your weaknesses in theory, but the problem in the last couple series hasn't necessarily been giving too much goals.
Sure.
It's been not scoring enough.
I also think there's enough wealth to go around though. Like we saw Matthews out for several games. We saw Nylander out for several games, and they still did they score at the rate you'd want them to? No, but Marner didn't get it done. And I think if you've got a healthy Nylander and a healthy Matthews, I think that's what you really ride on is them, the growth of Nyes, and you find ways to make up for it. But I'm with you. Like Leafs scoring should be more. And I think they got away from it a little bit this year, focusing so firmly on getting Matthews to 70.
And they just didn't play well down the stretch, right? And you can't just flip the switch. And then obviously the injuries were really weird. Like you lose those 2 guys for 3 moments. That's it's gonna hurt you.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. Well, let's get something spicy from you though, Joe. I think we're both in agreement that the hope and expectation is that the captain down in Tampa, Steven Stamkos, remains in Tampa, but I want to hear some options from you that if they can't come to an agreement, where's he go?
I do think overall that he'll end up back in Tampa. That's just my educated guess, but I think there are some options out there that would be interesting to me and I think would have interest. I think Nashville is one of them. Like a really good team. I think a team that has some of the benefits that the Tampa does in terms of where you live, and 2 of his good friends are McDonough and Luke Shen. He could play center, he could play wing there, he could be kind of a go-to guy for them. No state taxes, not a lot of media. That's one that would be an option for me. I think Detroit Red Wings are intriguing as well. His former GM, Steve Yzerman, they're looking for some guys that can maybe take some pressure off Dylan Larkin as the captain. Maybe he can be a guy that can kind of usher them into that next step of being in the playoffs. He could play wing, he could play center, probably wing, but then still that power play is all of a sudden 25% better. So I think, in Detroit is, I don't think he wants to leave Tampa, just the family and living there, but being in Detroit's not that far from Toronto and his family and stuff like that. So there are a couple options like that. I mean, you could always throw teams that are like, Vegas is always a wild card for any guy that's
Vegas has to always be included now, right?
They have to be included. Like if you lose Marchessault, you can't spend on him. Look at the projections of what the contract would be for Marchessault versus Stamkos. They're pretty, in some instances they're kind of close depending on what you look at, what the models you look at for like a 3-year deal or whatever. But yeah, I think he will have options. As Ryan Callahan told me, there'll be a line of teams waiting up. Kaloran told me, we have a lot of cap space in Anaheim. And a lot of to get to the salary cap floor, and Pat Verbeek, the former AGM in Tampa, is the GM there. Part of the group that was there when he was kind of coming into the league. I mean, he's got a lot of options, which is why it was interesting because, after all year kind of being no talks, and I think Stamkos was upset about that. And then all of a sudden after the plane landed in Tampa from Sunrise, the first thing Bruce Boudreau did was talk to Steven, like, hey, let's talk. We want to do this, and then Stamkos was asked about it. He goes, well, we haven't talked about it yet. So like, I'm hopeful and I want to do it, but until we have those conversations, like they're going to have to, like, he'll take a hometown discount. I have no doubt about that, but
not a big one.
They have to give him something, right? They have to show him by the number that he's wanted, and that I think the respect has to be there. I think he will do whatever he can to stay. He wants to stay. That'd be the best for both parties, but he's not going to be playing for free. 41 goal scorers, even at age 34, even maybe limited more defensively than he was in years past. Like, those guys are going to find a home pretty quickly, and teams are overpaying on July 1 all the time. So that'll be interesting to me because they want to have a cup contender with Steven Stamkos, not just sign him and keep him, right? The whole idea is to build around, have enough money to add to the pieces that they can get them back to where they want to be and not be in the first round exits back-to-back years. So still think he ends up in Tampa Bay, but there's some fun options there if he were to get to market and get that kind of interest from teams.
Very fair. I don't know. Anaheim is very, very fun to me, but no, I'm with you. I don't think he's going anywhere, but it's fun to dream. And I mean, let's be real. Tampa is basically like one step removed from being Vegas at this point, as far as just like the logical, but still ruthless tactics. Like you talked about Ryan McDonough. I think we all know very well how that came to be. So you never know, but I think this is different. I hope he stays there. I think he deserves to stay there, but we will see. That's really it for today then. Unless you had anything else you want to plug, either new upcoming stories, otherwise, but no, if not, then anyone that's listening, whether it's through the Soda Pod or Fellowship of the Rink feed, please subscribe, 5 stars. We really appreciate it. As always, video clips from this and all previous episodes up on the Soda Pod YouTube channel. But we appreciate you guys, as always, tuning in to this week's edition of Fellowship of the Rink. You stay classy. Stay to hockey.